Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisris Perek Aleph Halachet Dalet. We're learning today Daf Tes, and we left off on Daf Ches Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, Amar Rabbi Yosi. And let us review where we are at. I would like to begin again today by quoting the Rambam, Stam Lahoir, that the Hashgacha Pratis, we're learning this. In the middle of the month of Shvat, we are heading towards the 45th Siyum Harambam, or the 46th Siyum Harambam. Imagine only in the past if we would have learned it really great. And that's being mechazik us that going forward, when we'll learn it better, imagine where we will be at, God willing. Okay, so in Hilchas Meiser, Gimel Gimel, Peri Gimel, Halacha Gimel, the Rambam tells us, and the way the Rambam formulates it, is that the whole idea of Gemar Malacha, which is the final step that causes the item to become banafai tevel, not allowing us to eat it, even achilas arai, and all of the simanim that the Mishnah gave us, all of the steps that the Mishnah gave us, that is only when you're selling it in the market. But when you have Gemar Malacha, that's the way that Rambam writes it. If your intention is to take it home, even though you did its Gemar Malacha, it's still not going to become, the way that Rambam words it, completely kavu lamaiser. For that, the echad mishisha devarim koiveya lamaisres. It means the Rambam puts it where you want to take it home, the item already has a Gemar Malacha, but it's not home yet. So the first one is habayis, when you take it into the home. But it's not only that. Number 2, mekach. Mekach means that you make a transaction with it. And clearly from our sugya in the Yerushalmi, it doesn't have to be through a sale. Same will be through a gift. That's very important. Number 3, v'ha'esh, which means that this food item was put on the fire. That's going to be, again, the geya to our sugya today. V'hamelach, if you salted it. V'hatruma, if you chose to be toidemit. I'm using the word choosing because the obligation is only chal when you hit the kivius lemaiser. Didn't happen yet, but you are allowed to separate truma. So a person cannot say, well, I only want to separate truma, but the maiser rishon I'll leave for later. No, once you separated truma, you have to separate all of the other maiseres, and now you no longer can have even achilos aray. And the 6th is Shabbos. So these are the 6, and interestingly, 3 of them will be negate to our sugya today. Now, says the Braisa, now that we have these rules of shisha devarim that are kavas lemaiser, says the Braisa that if you took the oil, now here it's a little bit different, guys, because the oil in the Mishnah is not oil that you're planning to take home. The oil in the Mishnah, behemshach to a big bulk of the Mishnah, is speaking about someone who wants to merchandise their product. This nuance will be very relevant. And the Mishnah says that what's the Gemar Malacha by the oil when the oil falls into the Uka. And not only that, let's add what the Gabbai said, something which is again going to be very important for today. It's not that the moment the oil hit the Uka, that's it. It's not true. When the oil falls into that trough, Michael, it's still cloudy. Now, I don't know how much time it needs, but what is needed is the time that it takes for the dregs, for the shemarim, to go to the bottom of the uka, which is the way it works with the oil, and then the oil becomes clear. Now, I don't know exactly what point. Now it's a finished product. So the Mishnah said something gavaldik, that even if the oil falls into the uka and it reaches the oil in the trough, becomes clear, but there is oil that's stuck under the millstone, under the memo. There's still oil in the bag. There can be oil in the other parts of the olive press. There can be oil stuck on the floor in between the boards. That oil is loy nigmar malachtoi. And therefore, the Mishnah says, the Mishnah likes it. Okay, so we already know this, but the Mishnah gives an example that if someone took that oil and they put it on a chamita, on a wafer, or they put it l'toy chatamchoy, which is some sort of platter that was removed from the fire. All right. So the Mishnah says, so the Braisa says, so the Mishnah says you can eat it. we explained that the wafer, I know that I said in America, maybe people who have wafers for breakfast, it's not called casual eating. But in the times of the Mishnah, the oil, that type of eating, the wafer or the tamchoy, that type of platter, whatever that was, maybe because there was no bread, everything then was eating bread, it was considered a snack. So the way, in other words, the fact that the oil was put on food that they are eaten as snacks, as casual eating, then the oil is viewed as something that's going to be consumed casually. And that's the whole pshat, that since it didn't reach Gemar Malacha, you can have Achila Sarai. That was the Mishnah. The Braisa says a Chiddush, that if you have it on the wafer, if you have it on that platter, even though Shabbos comes in, and we just read in the Rambam, but it's really it's a Mishnah, that Shabbos is one of the Shisha Devarim that bring the item into the ultimate Koy Kevius Lemaiser. Parenthetically, guys, remember, the Rambam is speaking about an item that actually hit Gemar Malacha. The Rambam writes that explicitly. Elama, you're not planning to merchandise it, you're planning to take it home. Which the Rambam is applying Shabbos to oil that's in the Uka, that's already clear.
Can you please explain how in actuality Shabbos does this? Bring it to Gemar Malacha?
In other words, whenever the item becomes chashuv, the chashivus makes it into kevius lamaiser. It's kovas lamaiser. What makes something chashuv? The fact that there is a mitzvah of oinik Shabbos, just to make it clear, kovet Shabbos, oinik Shabbos. Kovet Shabbos is that which we do before Shabbos, likovet Shabbos. Oinik Shabbos has to do with that which we do on Shabbos to have the fulfillment of the mitzvah, midivrei neviim, v'koras ala Shabbos oinik. So the fact that it's a mitzvah to have oinig, that gives more chashivas to all of the foods that we eat on Shabbos and Anyant. Okay, so I just want to make it clear that the way the Rambam formulates it and what we're learning are not the same, but we are going to make it into the same. What the Braisa is telling you a chiddush, even though Shabbos came in and you have this oil, says the Braisa, still the words of the Braisa, it's not going to be or if you give it to a gift to someone else, you give the wafer, you give that platter to someone else, loy nitbal, gewaldik. And that's the way we worded it. I'm repeating it because it's the big things. I'm very excited. We're learning like a new Torah Chadash over here. Since the manner of the wafer, tamchoy, is informal, it's so informal that even Shabbos cannot be koiveya. Comes along Rabbi Yirmiyah, I want to repeat because we learned Rabbi Yirmiyah yesterday, and he says, Keilu b'med dvaram amurim. You know why? Because it was placed on the wafer, because it was placed on the platter. But if someone would have gathered the oil from the memel, he would have gathered oil that loy nigmar malachtoi, and he would have put it in a tzaloiches, and he would put it in a flask. So what are you going to do with that? No one knows yet. You can put it from the flask on a wafer. You can put it on that flask into your bread. It's neutral, the flask. If it's in a flask, Kam Shabbos. If it's in a flask and you give it a gift, then yes, nitbal, which fit. Because we were even struggling when you learned the first time, you're trying to understand the logic of the Brais. I mean, Shabbos is koivas. No, Shabbos is not koivas because it's on the wafer. Says Rabbi Yirmiyah, exactly, because it's on the wafer. But if it's in a flask, then we go back to the normal rule. Shabbos is koivas. Giving it as a gift, which is included in the mekach, is koivas. That is where we left off. We're going to begin today's shir learning Rabbi Yossi. The Amoida Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi goes even further. Rabbi Yossi says, yes, the Braisa gave an example of it being on a wafer, because the Braisa is just elaborating further from our Mishnah. But the emes, even if someone gathered the oil shaloi nigmar malachtoi and he put it in a tzoloiches, since the oil is loy nigmar malachtoi, even though Shabbos comes, or if you gave it to someone else, we will still apply the law of the Braisa loy nitbal, and that will be the beginning of today's shir. Why? There are shisha devarim that are koveya lamaisres. Let's get used to the words. That's the whole pshat. Now again, when we learn the Rambam, we're not going to have a kasha b'chlal, because the Rambam uses the shisha devarim when the item was nigmar malachtoi, Eloma, you're not planning to sell it, you're planning to take it home. Since you're planning to take it home, you have to have Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, but for that we have a rule. It's not only the Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, it's Re'iyas Pnei Habayis plus another 5, a total of 6. But that's not the way our sugya is understanding it. The whole back and forth is based on the premise that Rambam was the one that came to it. That the Shisha Devarim is a rule. When these things happen, it's Koivas L'Maiser. And it's small dafim. It's so beautiful, and the Gemara is going to have a huge chiddush in explaining Shitas Rabbi Yossi, and that's going to lead us into another correlation between Hilchas Maisres and Hilchas Shabbos. And just to say now, in the words of introduction, that we spoke yesterday Shin Yutes, right? Today we're going to go a little bit with the laws of Muksa, right? Shin Ches, and right, Shin Yut Ches is Bishul, Shin Yutes is what we spoke about yesterday. About Boider, and we have the dinam of Muksa. And just to say like this, on one hand, there's a rule that if something was Muksa, was set aside not to be used for Shabbos, or it was not designated to be used for Shabbos, if it was in the state of Muksa, Bein HaShmashas, Migoy, the Iskat Soil, Bein HaShmashas, it remains Muksa the whole Shabbos. Even if whatever it is that made it Muksa is no longer here. But on the other hand, even if something was not Muksa during Bein HaShmashas, just be aware that things could become Muksa on Shabbos or on Yontif. I'll give you just an example. If you have a utensil, a keli is not Muksa. Keli was made to be used to drinking. You can drink on Shabbos. Okay, Gavaldik. Right, even before, we can move a keli and oichel even without a purpose. It's the ultimate not Muksa. What happens if the keli breaks on Shabbos and the parts of the keli are not functional? That's a good. Those broken pieces are muksa. There is a rule that one is not allowed to make something that was not muksa into muksa on purpose. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos and on Yontiv, and we're going to see how that's going to be very negeya in this Svara, explaining Rabbi Yossi, challenging Rabbi Yossi, which will be a lot of the back and forth of one part of today's Daf Tes, and the other part of today's Gemara will be going back to this whole machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. B'negeya bishul, klei rishon, klei sheni, not for Shabbos, for Meiser. It doesn't have to work the same way, but we're learning, again, one of the Shisha Devarim is putting it on the fire. Yakir, again, putting it on fire makes it chashuv. I mean, but it has to be something to do with you're putting it on fire. Okay, so says the Tanakama that even if the klei rishon is off the fire, if you put this oil, again, the Mishnah's oil is the oil, even though the Ukka's oil already was Nigmar Malachtoi, but the Memel's oil, the Ekel's oil, the between the boards oil, it's not, it wasn't, not in the Ukka. Okay, loy Nigmar Malachtoi, and therefore you can have Achila Sarai. But if you put it in a klei rishon, even if it's off the fire, says the Tanakama, that's Eish, Nitbal. Comes Rabbi Yehuda and he argues and he says no. He says, no, that when is it called Eish? When you put it in the klei rishon on the fire. And even Rabbi Yehuda gave the two exceptions that we're not going to focus on at all, and that is that if in the keli that's off the fire, if there is chometz, vinegar, or there's tzir, both tzir is fish brine, they both have a sharpness. So it's interesting that sharpness, together with the heat, not the heat of boiling, that brings about cooking. That allows for the cooking to happen more easily. And therefore, even with Rabbi Yehuda, if there was chometz or tzir, even though it's off the fire, then yes, nitbal. But otherwise, machlokes Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Remember that clearly, because we're going to have two svaras in the Gemara today. Why are we being machalik between klei rishon and klei sheni? And they're very different svaras, even though we somehow touched upon it when we learned the Mishnah, because I was just repeating certain svaras that we learned together in Masechta Shabbos. Just for the record, to get excited that we're going to learn a Masechta Shabbos in Yerushalmi, whenever we'll get there. And that's going to be such a great opportunity. B'chlal, Masechta Shabbos, everything is great. But we're going to chazard the whole Masechta Mishnayos. And for the people, hopefully collectively, if with the little bit that we remember from the Bavli, we'll have opportunities like Masechta Brachas to compare the differences and to appreciate better the Torah of Eretz Yisrael versus the Torah of Golus, of Bavel. Okay. Chavra Daf Ches Amud Beis. Rabbi Yirmiyah limits the Braisa. Braisa is only because it was on snacks. It's like only when you put it on the candy. That's what it would be like today. It's things that you snack upon. If you have it in a tzuloiches, no. Tzuloiches kam Shabbos, nekach, nitbal. Amar Rabbi Yosi, no. Afilu nasan b'tzuloiches, even if you put that oil, shaloi nigmar malachtoi, in a flask, and kam Shabbos, or you gave it as a gift, really, or you sold it, still loy nitbal. And right away, the Gemara jumps on that. That has to be explained. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah, hold on. Ve'ein Shabbos toiveles. And ve'ein mikoch toivel. Clearly, you see that even though the words that we just quoted from the Rambam, from the Shisha Devarim is mekach. But mekach doesn't mean that because someone gave money. Mekach means an exchange of ownership. And that happens by a gift as well. Doesn't work. This is a rule. How do you explain that? Daf test comes along the Chiddush. So Rabbi Yosi explains himself. Amalein kahi the Amar. Guys, we're going to find out something that's so exciting that I never knew. I'll tell you the kasha that I think I mentioned it a few times. Sometimes in the Yerushalmi, you have one saying b'shem someone else. Amar Rabbi, whoever the Tana or the Amayra is, b'shem someone else. Sometimes in the Yerushalmi, there is no words in between one and the other. Sometimes you even have to chap, you have to know their history if they lived at the same time. So then it's two Amayroim saying the same thing. This one said and that one said. But sometimes it's one also quoting from the other. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav in the Bavli. Rabbi Yehuda was a Talmud of Rav. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav means that he heard it from Rav. In the Yerushalmi, it's more b'shem or nothing. Why do we say b'shem? Why do we say nothing? You'll see right now. So, kahi the Amar Rabbi Yosi, b'shem Rab Ze'eram. Or, and, Rabbi Yoina, Rab Ze'eram. You see over here? So, Rabbi Yosi, b'shem Rab Ze'eram. Rabbi Yoina, Rab Ze'eram. So in other words, two Amoraim are repeating Rab Ze'era. But look, when the Yerushalmi writes Rabbi Yosi repeating Rab Ze'era, it says Rabbi Yosi b'shem Rab Ze'era. When Rabbi Yoina is repeating Rab Ze'era, there's no word b'shem. It's not a fluke. So this is the rule. When someone hears it directly, you don't write the word b'shem. I'm talking to me to remember this. Rabbi Yoina Rab Ze'era. The b'shem is mafsik. When you didn't hear it directly, you heard it in the name of. I heard that Rebbe said, b'shem. When you heard it yourself, the Rebbe said. Not I heard that the Rebbe gesagt. So anyways, bottom line is both Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yoina are quoting Rabbi Ze'era. Rabbi Yosi didn't have the merit to hear it directly. Rabbi Yoina had the merit to hear it directly. Now, whichever one, however we come to Rabbi Ze'era heard it b'shem Rabbi Lazar. That what? Now this is what Rabbi Yosi is saying. This is the logic. First of all, I didn't make it up, says Rabbi Yosi to Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Lazar already said it. What did we just learn recently? That the best Torah comes from Rabbi Lazar in these dinim of Trumas U'Maisers. We had this in the previous Masechta. That's a compliment. He was like the master. That the Braisa, don't limit the Braisa. Even if you put it in a flask. Why? This is the word. When you take oil, guys, don't forget, the oil you didn't take after it was refined. You took the oil from under the millstone. You took the oil that is a little bit cloudy. Why did you take it? Because you needed oil. Everyone would prefer to have oil that's more refined. What's the kavanah of the owner of this oil? I'm going to use what I need now. I can't wait. But once I used the whatever I needed, he has it in mind that whatever I will not use, don't forget, this oil was never refined. It never sat in the uke yet. This person is intending to put it back. Or the same thing is with the wine. If someone took the wine from the gas el yoina, if someone took the wine from the tziner, remember? You didn't even have the first time where you skimmed the shemarim off the top. Why did you take it? Because you needed it. You needed it. But if you won't need it anymore, you used part of it, you're not going to just leave it on your shelf. You would prefer for it to become more refined. You plan to put it back. So it's not that it came midavar shaloi nigmar malachtoi. According to our Gemara, even if it came from something that's not nigmar malachtoi, Shabbos koivas, mekach koivas. But it's about your future intent. Since you plan to put it back in there, this is beautiful. Since you plan to put it back, then it's not going to be koiveya. And now, by the way, my friends, this fits with the Rambam, because basically that's why the Rambam insists when a Shabbos koivas, Shabbos is koivas only if something already was nigmar malachtoi. Just want to say, to get from this to the Rambam, now that we see it, we appreciate it, the greatness of the Rambam. That's the way I think the Rambam understood what he concluded, that he put the Shisha Devarim only from something Shenigmar Malachtoi, because what Rabbi Yossi is saying, all b'shem Rabbi Lazar, that if something is loy Nigmar Malachtoi, you can't say that Shabbos is koivas. It's not koivas. Why? Because even though you took it, you're going to put it back. You're going to put it back in the case where it's in a flask. Now, I know sometimes you can put it back. And according to our Gemara, let's leave the Rambam to the side. I don't want to say what the Rambam holds. According to our Gemara, if you don't plan to put it back, or if there's nothing to put back, then enechanami, Shabbos will be koivas, even though shaloi nigmar malachtoi. But they're debating why oil in a flask. So the oil is like, it's a nice amount of oil. You'll use what you need on Shabbos, and then you're going to put it back. Same thing, you give it to someone else. You gave a gift, but you tell the recipient, listen, I wanted to give you a gift. The oil is not yet refined. That person is going to put it in the uka. He's going to put it somewhere for it to be separated from the shemarim. So it's because of what you plan to do. You still plan to do a step of processing. So beautiful. Gewaldig. And now, it sounds so good. Don't think Rabbi Yirmiyah is backing down. He's not. Rabbi Yirmiyah, actually, we have to move. Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to prove that he's right. And Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to quote Chayile or Chayale. Chayal means a soldier. Chayal in the Gemara means the koyach. The power of Rabbi Yirmiyah to argue with this Rabbi Lazar, even though there's a logic here. The best is a Mishnah. Minado, I have a Mishnah that will prove otherwise. And by the way, he'll have soon a Braisa that will also prove that Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to prove his Shita from a Mishnah, which will be a problem with Rabbi Yossi, and then from a Braisa, which will be a problem, and Rabbi Yossi will stand his ground. That's the whole sugya. But let's read it inside. Now, this Mishnah in Perek Dalid of Masechtas Beitza is speaking about leniencies of the Tana Rabbi Eliezer. V'oid Omer Rabbi Eliezer, another leniency. Oimed Adam al hamuksa. Now, the word muksa, I know in the intro, yes, we're speaking about muksa, but muksa also means an area which was designated to place items for them to dry out. That's what we're talking about. And the muksa that we are talking about in the Mishnah in Beitza is someone has geroigerias and simukim. Look inside the Maharafulda, 9 lines from the top. Oimed Adam halamuksa. Hainu. You have figs, and you have tzimukim, you have raisins. I'm reading inside the Marafulda. And you put it, the word muksa here means on a place that was designated to have these items dried out upon. Now there's another din. Muksa. It's 2 different muksas. The stam groigris v'tzimukim muksim. First of all, the muksa. I want to tell you why the muksa. Because when something is being dried out, it's funny. When they are not dried out, they're edible. They're edible. When they finish drying out, they're edible. During their process of it being dried out, the quality goes down. And some people don't eat it. Now, if you decide to eat it, it's not like it's poisonous. It's not terrible. But it's not so edible. It's a middle. And because of it being in the middle, nishtahed, nishtahin, it also has the status of muksa. Muksa means you can't eat it on Shabbos and on Yom Tov because it's not edible yet. V'stam geroigris v'tzimukim muksim, and another detail, the final, you have to put it all together. People who plan to dry out their figs and or to dry out their grapes into raisins, when will they separate maasros? When it's a finished product, when it's dried out. There is a presumption that while items that are meant to be dried out are not yet fully dried out, they're still not mi'usarim. V'loy mi'usarim heim. Marafulda. The ene gilam la'aser koidim gemar malachtim. So now the question is, can someone take from this Shabbos and Yontif? Can you take it from before Shabbos and Yontif? So first of all, you have an issue. How could you? It's not mu'usar. It's not tithed. So for that, the final thing is that the Mishnah is speaking about Shemitah. Shemitah year's product doesn't have to be tithed. Ubashvius ein meiser noyeg. So the only issue on the Shvius year, ve'ein yisurim ela mishum muksa. So now I'm just concluding in the Marafulda, v'chi oimed erev Shabbos, if a person stands on erev Shabbos, and he makes a declaration, Bikan ani noito l'machar, I will take tomorrow Shabbos and Yom Tov from these half dried out figs or raisins, half, since he said, that's called hachana. The opposite of muksa is hachana. That means you set it aside to be used. That's a good thing. You did it before Shabbos. Hazmana milsa. Here, in other words, just a oral declaration is enough. It's not like a stone. You know, there's many different types of muksa. There's muksa machmas atzmai. We paskin muksa machmas atzmai, just declaring that you're going to use the stone to stone the car that's driving through your neighborhood. That's still muksa. But if you make a scratch on the stone, you make a real hachana l'shem yichud, then it's not muksa. So here for this, just hazmana, which means oral designation, is enough.
Isn't it by the chikalach we said that this check we're gonna shecht on Yontav, and that's actually
a chicken doesn't have to be separated because since you are allowed to shecht on Yontav, it's automatically muchan. Unless it's an animal that's not domesticated. I think that was the scene.
Right, but you still have to make a chana.
I don't think if it's an animal stam. I think the hachana is only needed if it's baisois or midbariyos. That's what I remember. We have to check that. The midbariyos need hachana.
All right.
Okay, so now let's read it inside. A person can stand before Shabbos or before Yom Tov. Muksa here means on that part of the field where he can see the items which are also what we call muksa. But when only on Erev Shabbos B'Shvis, only on the Shemitah year, and again, you can't do it on Shabbos. On Shabbos, it's too late because migoy dis katsoi, too late. But if you do it from before Shabbos and you declare verbally, then you are allowed to take. Now hold on. Says now Rabbi Lazar, this is only true. The Gemara is saying this is only true during the Shemitah year, which implies sha'ar shnei shavua, but during the other years of the cycle, my friends, then that will not be enough. Why will not be enough? I have a simple kasha. Why will that not be enough, Aviv? Because it's not tithed. So what? There's no gemar malachi yet. These are in the middle of them being dried. They're not fully dried. Something that doesn't have gemar malacha, you can at least have achilas arai. You can at least have achilas arai. It must be, says Rabbi Yirmiyah, because on Shabbos is koivas. Shabbos is koivas. That's why if it's not during the Shvi'is year, you have to tie them. You can't even have achilas arai. Now hold on a second. I want to tell you something, Aviv. If I am drying out my figs and my raisins, my figs or my grapes, however you want to call it, even though I'm saying before Shabbos, tomorrow I'm going to take some of it. Let me tell you something. Whatever I don't end up eating, what will I do with it? I'm going to put it back. Because that's what we're saying, that items that are being dried, they are good when they're fresh. They are good when they're dried. In the in-between, that's why they are by default muksa. Now, I can undo it by doing hachana, but that's a gavaldik arayim, that even though l'choira, you're going to put it back, doesn't make a difference. Still, Shabbos is koivas. So that's Rabbi Yirmiyah's proof that oil in the tzoloiches, even though you plan to putting it back, doesn't do anything. It's such a good proof. Now Rabbi Yossi has to explain himself. So Trek the Gemara, my Ovid lay Rabbi Yossi. Answers the Gemara, let me tell you why. In the case in Beitza, you cannot put it back. You know why you cannot put it back? Because putting it back on Shabbos. Because putting it back there on Shabbos will render it muksa. Now, whoever mentioned putting it back on Shabbos, that's the back and forth. In other words, Rabbi Yirmiyah will also agree that you can't put it back on Shabbos. But Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to argue, but you can put it back Matzah Shabbos, you can put it back Sunday. But Rabbi Yossi is saying, no, you can't put it back. Why? By the way, oil from the tzoloiches is allowed to be put in the uka on Shabbos. It's not muksa. Only something that's being dried out is in the status of muksa. The uka's oil is not muksa. Big difference. And that's a rule that you can't take something and make it muksa on Shabbos. And that's why nitbal, mamash masak midvash. Now another round, final round, where again, Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to have a raya to his thing. Shabbos is koivas lamaser, my friends. Just because you're going to put it back, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, I don't care. It makes no difference. And I'll prove that Masnisa Lochoira, there's a Braisa that pliga al Rabbi Yossi, that argues with Rabbi Yossi. Now, the Braisa is 3 words. And the words are Ein Arai L'Shabbos. No, it's when we are learning through the elaboration of the Shisha Devarim, Shabbos means that when something goes into Shabbos, Ein Arai, you can't have casual eating. Now, the Braisa doesn't make any exceptions. The Braisa is not only speaking about you can't put it back because it's muksa. Ein arei l'Shabbos. Now, according to Rabbi Yossi, that's not true. According to Rabbi Yossi, many items that are not nigmar malachton, that are going to be put back, the remains, the leftovers, according to Rabbi Yossi, even Shabbos won't make it, won't be koiveya it. So again, from the stam words of the Braisa, mashma, yes, like Rabbi Yirmiyah, and it's a kasha on Rabbi Yossi turning to the Avtesamid base. So again, Rabbi Yossi has to puzzle, will have to say that this Braisa is only ubelvad davar sheyesh lo muksa, only an item that indeed may not be put back on Shabbos. And why would that be? Because you're going to make it into muksa. But if you will be allowed to put it back on Shabbos, like the oil in the jug, that you are allowed to put it in the uka on Shabbos or on Yontif, beautiful. According to Rabbi Yossi, even Shabbos will not be koiveya. Now, says the Gemara, al dati de Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah obviously argues with Rabbi Yossi's limitation of the Braisa. Loi shanya. He says absolutely not. There's no difference. He davar sheyesh lo muksa, and he davar she'ein lo muksa. Beautiful. Now, today was a big day. For me, even this detail about the b'shem without the b'shem was great. Rabbi Yirmiyah holds, coming back, that if you put oil that's loy nigmar malachta in a flask, kam Shabbos, or you give it a gift, or you sell it, now you can't even have a casual consumption. So now Rabbi Yirmiyah, he asked Bishitas, Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now don't forget, if the oil, my friends, if they are in between the boards, then if it's in between the boards, if it's still there, then loy nitbal. Even according to Rabbi Yirmiyah. That means if I have oil under the memo, think about it. I'm producing oil. What do you think? Every Shabbos that comes, now all of a sudden the oil that's in the millstone, the oil that's in the other parts of the oil press, you think they become kovas lamat? No, they don't. If they are in their place of production, Shabbos doesn't do anything. It's only if they're taken away from there. So now the question will be, what happens if you put it in the flask, but you left the flask on the floor between the boards? It's in the flask, but you didn't take the flask away. According to Rabbi Yossi, vaday loy nitbal, regardless, because even if you took the flask away, since you plan to put it back, loy nitbal. But according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, that it says the moment you took it in a flask, now kam Shabbos, now nitbal. What happens if you left the flask in the oil press? So do you look at the oil as it being in the flask, or do you look at the oil as it being still in between the boards? If you filled up a flask, but you left it on the floor, you left it in between one board or the other, do we say, now that it's in a flask, now came Shabbos, nitbala, or but if since it's in the location where loy nigmar malachtoi, and even lokula alma, according to everyone, if it takes me a month to make the oil, If it takes me a week to make the oil, if it takes me 2 days to make the oil, but I began on Friday and I have to leave it where it is and I have to continue on Sunday, no one will say that since Shabbos came in, now everything is nikvas lamaiser. No, it doesn't work that way. You left the flask on the ground, maybe loy nitbala, and this inquiry remains unresolved. Okay, Atkan, the first topic of today, and now we're going to Kleidisha and Kleisheni, and let's go. So the Mishnah says that lo yitain lilfas or ilfas or lilfas without the aleph in the Yerushalmi is a shallow pan. A kedera is a deep pan. You cannot put these oils inside those pots kishehein midutachin while they are boiling. According to the Tanakama, even if they were taken off the fire, why not? This is another from the 6 devarim that we read today in the Rambam. One of them is called eish. The Tanakama holds that a kleidishain, which means the utensil that was on the fire when the item was cooking, if you close the fire or you removed it from the fire, that is called, the food is in its kleidishain. Tanakama holds that even though it's off the fire, so it's not boiling, it still has the status of you put the oil into fire, and therefore it's going to be nikava'as lamaiser. But the question is, hold on, what happens if the pot cools off? Kleidishan is going to be what? Kleidishan is eish until what point? Ad heichon. Can be even if it gets cold. Cannot be. And by the way, for Shabbos, it's the same rule. We don't say that if it goes under what temperature? So Rabbi Yehuda bar Pazi, now you see, Rab Simon. So now we know that Rabbi Yehuda bar Pazi heard it directly from Rab Simon, that heard it in the name of Rabbi Yossi bar Rab Chanina. I know that in Masechta Shabbos we Yatzei Ledes. It's the same word almost, but let's get over here to the words of the Yerushalmi. When you put your hand in that pot, when it's already off the fire, if the temperature is such that you don't control your hand, that you instinctively your hand recoils. Do you have the ability to dafka leave your hand and get it burnt?
But there is a little bit of distinction
yes,
between yad nichvet. There is a little bit tiny distinction between yad nichvet to yad soledes.
You're right, Yakir. I want to say clearly you're right, 100%. And a lot, there's a big deal about this. That's why I take back. I didn't mean what I said. I said it wrong. It's not the same thing in a different words. And there's going to be other words here in the Yerushalmi, and they are very nuanced different. Now, how to translate that in temperatures, I don't know. Even Yatzei Ledes for Shabbos, I know there's a big, not everyone is of the same opinion. If I'm not mistaken, I hope I'm remembering, Rav Moshe said 110 Fahrenheit. But it's not everyone is of the same exact. It's going to be within a certain, no one is arguing from 80 to 150. I know that, but there's a difference. And sometimes practically you have to know where was it at. But I'm going with Yakir. These are the words. At kadesh yehi nasun yad l'toicha v'hi nichveis. Nichveis means it's going to get burnt. That if it's that temperature or more, there is where the Tanakama says, even though it's off the fire, you put the oil in it, eish. If it's less than this temperature, afilu hatanakama will be maida. There's no eish. The oil didn't go on fire, and therefore you can still have casual consumption of that oil. Now comes along Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda holds no. Rabbi Yehuda holds that only on the fire, with the exception of Chaimetz and Sir. Says the Gemara. The Hakol, I just said Rabbi Yehuda because Hakol Moedim is because now we're throwing Rabbi Yehuda in our minds. Hakol Moedim, everyone agrees that Bechlei Sheni Shu Muter, that if you put this oil in a Klei Sheni, it will not render it Tevel. Muter means you are allowed to have Achilas Arai. Gemara wants to know why. Why? Ma bein Klei Rishon leKlei Sheni. And Chevra, these 2 points, the Gemara is going to give you 2 very different ways of understanding it. How much of this do we put in Masechta Shabbos? I'm telling you, this is a big sugya. If we would be in yeshiva, we would spend a long time just trying to put that together, according to whom. But we're learning Hilchas Meisters, don't forget. But these 2 logics were not unfamiliar, and they're very different one from the other. The first is Rabbi Yossi Berabun. And again, words, Kan Hayad Shoiletes. Meaning, when you put your hand in a Klei Sheni, The words that we learned in Masechta Shabbos. The walls of the klei sheni are cold. So when you put food from a klei rishon in a klei sheni, automatically there is a certain lowering of the temperature. And the way we're going to word it over here is that if you put your hand in something that's still hot, but in a klei sheni, your hand is shoylet. Your hand will rule. Like I said, it doesn't instinctively recoil. You don't have that. Ooh, it's warm, but your hand is shoylet. In other words, he's saying a big thing. I'll tell you what he's trying to say in between the lines. So since in a klei sheni, your yad is shoyletes, that's why everyone will agree that it's not called eish. But vikan in a klei rishon, ein hayat shoyletes. So ein hayat shoyletes, I think, is the opposite, the same, but the opposite of the counterfeit coin. Ad kedei sheinosun yadoi letoicha v'hi nechveis. When v'hi nechveit, your yad is not shoylet. In ein hayat shoyletes. You know what Rabbi Yossi ben Abun is saying? He's saying something very big. He's saying that in fact there is no difference between klei rishon and klei sheni. That's what bottom line. There is no difference. In other words, what letanakama? What's the criteria of fire? Ein hayat shoyletes. Why am I saying that? Because what he's basically saying is that if you have in a klei sheni the temperature where ein hayat shoyletes, then enechanami, it's called eish. I know from Shabbos we're machmer by klei sheni. This is it. No, it's not about klei rishon and klei sheni. That's what he's saying. It's about yat shoyletes, ein hayat shoyletes. And just to know as a rule that liquids.
So how does Rabbi Yossi understand klei sheni, Rabbi?
Exactly, klei sheni is because since beroiv, the klei sheni lowers the temperature. That's what he's saying. These are big amoraim. That's how it works. He's saying, I'm just saying in my words, there is no difference according to Rabbi Yossi ben Abun. It's not about klei rishon and klei sheni. Klei rishon and klei sheni is like the mitzias, and in klei sheni it lowers the temperature. It's the same rules. If in the klei rishon yat shoyletes, not eish. If in the klei sheni ein hayat shoyletes or yadoi nichveis, it's all the same. It's not about the rishon and sheni. Does your hand recoil, or can you be shoylet your hand? That is the first opinion. Rabbi Yoina, the Amoida, says no. Even if in the klei sheni the food is so hot that ein hayat shoyletes, even there we differentiate between klei rishon and klei sheni. Why? This is I said this in the Mishnah. I remember this from one of the Rishonim on Shabbos. Really, the ladder. I'm going to go to Kevin in a moment. We have really only on fire something cooking. Cooking means boiling. Why is it that we say that in the klei rishon, even though it's off the fire, it's still called eish, because the klei rishon sometimes is on the fire. So it's a gzeira. Klei sheni was never on the fire, so we don't make a gzeira. Let's read it inside. It's called the harchaka. Elo asu herchek leklei rishon. Why? Because if I'm going to allow putting oil into the klei rishon at times and say, it's not yet eish, I might do it even when the klei rishon is on the fire. It's really fire. Boiling is what cooks. You took it off the fire. I know there are exceptions, but as the rule, most liquids, you take it off the fire, it stops boiling. It's not boiling, it's not cooking. But but it's a harchaka. It's in the klei rishon, you never can do it unless it becomes cold. Klei sheni never boiled, and therefore klei sheni. That's a huge machlokes. And Amar Rabbi Mana says, Rabbi Mana, let me side with Rabbi Yoina. He wants to point out, like what Yakir was asking, if according to Rabbi Yossi ben Abun, like why do you say klei sheni? Like what are you talking about? Say yat shoylet and yat shoylet. He's saying there's no difference. And the Gemara wants to prove that there are many items that are boiling in a klei sheni. Boiling, not bubbling, but they're very hot. They're ein hayat shoyletes even in a klei sheni. Amar Avman, I'll tell you. Hahi in pincha the urzaya arois, rice. Those dishes of rice, which Rav Mana experienced, were hot even in a klei sheni. Now here you see that Rav Mana was the son of Rabbi Yoina. Messiah la'aba, it's a right to my father. Oh, and pincha de gelusa, certain types of hot cereals, again, davar gush, that they retain their heat. They're not liquid. They don't get cooled off so quick by a klei. Again, Messiah la'aba. Da'at mefanile min asar la'asar, that even after you transfer it from the klei to klei, still, v'oit kedoin urasach, it's still very hot. Still ein ayat shoylet. Gewaldik. We'll stop over here. I'm excited with this. Yes, Yakir. It's great.
The ladle is...
Oh, so I want to tell the Kevan. So in halacha lamaisa, there's a big machlokes regarding the ladle. Because if, first of all, the ladle is on the fire. Second of all, even this logic, like according to Rabbi Yossi Berabun, why do we say klei and klei sheni? Because the walls of the klei sheni cool down the item. But since the ladle goes in the original pot, so the ladle itself becomes heated up. So maybe it's not even called a klei sheni. And therefore, because of this debate in halacha, if you want to, bottom line, if you want to add salt on Shabbos into your soup, here's the issue: to put salt in the klei rishon, we're not allowed to. If the ladle is still a klei rishon, so the ladle is a klei rishon. So what's your pot? What's your bowl? Only a klei sheni. We're machmir by certain things we don't even put in a klei sheni. So if you want to add salt, you know what you do? You put your spoon into it, and you take some soup out. Now again, Kevin, the spoon is like the ladle because it goes into the bowl. But we put the spoon together with the ladle. There is a side that says that even though it went into it, it goes down a notch. So we say that now that you had both bowl into the ladle, and then I'm saying pot into the ladle and bowl into the spoon, we're gonna view it, by the time it gets to the spoon, it's already not klei sheni.
One has to be metal, though, right?
And that's how we put salt. And you put the salt, and then you put it back in, and make sure you don't insult.
Rabbi, the spoon has to be metal.
Even if the spoon is metal, it doesn't have to be anything.
Got it. Thank you.
If your wife made the soup, do it discreetly, and if the gabbai made the soup.